Jake Stuart with the National Sports Media Association. Today, I'm joined by five-time and 2021 Sportscaster of the Year for the state of Ohio, Paul Keels. Paul, thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure. Glad to do it, Jake.
Well, first off, Paul, you obviously, just by your shirt, you're doing Ohio State Buckeyes sports. You've been doing it for a long, long time. Can you tell us about what first brought you into the industry?
Oh, my goodness. Probably, Jake, like so many of the other people you've talked about, growing up as a sports fan. And in the 60s and 70s, when there weren't a lot of games on TV on a regular basis, your connection really was through the radio. And growing up in Cincinnati as a big fan of the Reds, that was kind of a nighttime companion when I went to bed as a youth. Also following the old NBA Cincinnati Royals, who are now in Sacramento. And then as the Bengals came into existence in the late 60s, and then following the college teams that we have in Ohio, whether it was Cincinnati or Xavier or Ohio State. But just being a sports fan and being connected to those teams by radio, not being a very good athlete, but sportscasting was a way to get involved in sports. And so it's been an awful lot of fun.
Well, can you tell us, Paul, first off, what does it mean to you, working in Ohio, obviously a bigger market, particularly for college football with Ohio State? What is it like to work in a bigger market with such a big sports market?
It's pretty amazing. And Jake, I've been fortunate enough to work in even larger markets. I spent 7 years working in Detroit. Had the chance to work at the network level at United Press International in Washington, D.C. But then in 1989, got the opportunity to come back home to Cincinnati. And then pleasantly was approached with the opportunity to move to Columbus to do the Ohio State games. And knowing that Ohio State was huge, but really for the past 24, going on 25 years now to be involved in this, there's a constant reminder and a constant learning curve of just how big Ohio State is, especially Ohio State football. And basketball certainly has its moments where it grabs a lot of attention. But what it really ties to, Jake, a lot is the fan base. The Ohio State fans are as solid as any that you'll come across in the country as far as their passion for their favorite team. So it's just a great thing to be able to be the connection to the fans.
Yeah, absolutely, Paul. And this is your fifth award from the National Sports Media Association. Clearly you're doing something right, Paul. What does this one mean to you? Does it mean as much as the first one?
Well, the first one is very unique and very special. Having known about the association, the award ceremony, but getting to go for the first time was really very exciting. And it allowed to be able to connect with some people I already knew, but to make new acquaintances, not the least of which was Dave Gorin. But to win it for a fifth time now, and any time really been able to win it, Jake, the first thing that comes to mind is in a state that has so many great sportscasters, to be able to represent the state of Ohio. And, guys like Dan Horde, who I know very well, who's been a constant winner, and so many others. It's just an honor to be able to represent the state of Ohio. This one's exciting because it'll be the first time that I will have had a chance to attend the event since it was all moved to Winston-Salem from Salisbury. So anxious to see what it's like now to have it in Winston-Salem.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned Dan Horde, voice of the Cincinnati Bengals, one of our past winners as well. Who are some of the other sportscasters that you've looked up to during your time as a commentator?
Well, it kind of goes back to your childhood, really. And growing up following the Cincinnati Reds, guys like Jim McIntyre, Joe Nuxall, Al Michaels, Marty Brenneman. There was a gentleman that did the NBA games for the Cincinnati Royals, Don Valentino, who I listened to a lot. Phil Samp, who was the original voice of the Cincinnati Bengals. Marv Holman was the Ohio State broadcaster that we listened to a lot in Cincinnati. But those were guys that I really looked up to as a young person growing up and wanting to get into sportscasting. And there were so many others as your career starts that you get to meet or you get to know or you get to listen to. But those were the early influences.
Now, I'm curious, Paul, we've kind of heard a very wide array of answers for this next one, but how much did your work change as a result of COVID-19 this past year?
Oh, my goodness. It changed, Jake, incredibly. Probably the biggest change was the fact that the company that owns our radio station, Tegna, did not allow anyone to do any business travel during that time. So like so many others, we had to do away games remotely. We were able to do home games in person. And it was an incredible challenge, like I'm sure you've heard so many other people tell you about. Doing football off of TV monitors, incredibly difficult, especially when it came to things like yard lines, formations for receivers. Basketball, less difficult, but still a challenge. And really trying to put the spirit into broadcasting a game that you're not at in person was really difficult. In the midst of all of that, our radio station was moving buildings. moving from one building to another. So we at times had to deal with doing things out of temporary studios. We could not do in-person interviews with the head coaches that we deal with. So our pregame interviews and everything had to be done by telephone. And what helped that is that we have two head coaches that are wonderful to deal with, Ryan Day for Ohio State football and Chris Holtman for Ohio State basketball. They understood, they were very willing to go along with all of that. So that was the biggest challenge, doing games remotely. And once we were able to get back to normal and doing not only home games, but away games in person, it just really made you appreciate what goes into being at an event in person and trying to relay that to the people that are listening.
Well, there's been some pretty, incredible moments in Ohio State sports history, even since I've been able to follow them in the past couple of years. I'm sure behind the scenes and being able to, be a part of it as you have, you've been able to see some pretty incredible moments as well. Can you tell our listeners about, maybe a moment or a game that really stands out to you?
It's hard, Jake, to nail down just one or two, but certainly in 2002, when Ohio State won their first national championship in football since 1968, just the excitement that came with a team that really people didn't expect would be a national contender. Thought maybe they were, it would happen another year after that. And so many close games that they just barely hung on and won. But in 2002, when they beat Michigan in Columbus, and that earned them the berth to play in the Fiesta Bowl for the national championship, that really stands out. And then to play Miami, Florida in the national championship game in Arizona. Miami, I believe, was like an 11-point favorite in that game, defending national champs, a game that had so many future NFLers on the field. And for Ohio State to be able to win that game in overtime in a season that was just, full of cliffhangers, that's something that really stands out. But I also have to include with basketball in 2007, the team that Thad Matta had with Greg Oden and Mike Conley, they were able to have an incredible regular season, get to the national championship game, lose to Florida, but a season that was just incredibly exciting. So within those seasons, there probably could be other individual games, but maybe that Ohio State Michigan game to get them into a national championship game in football. If I have to single out one, Jake, that would probably be it.
All those teams you mentioned, just so much talent inside and out. Really, really cool to watch just over the years. Last question for you, Paul, and thank you so much for being here and for your time. What advice do you have for some younger sportscasters like myself, some of our listeners, for just getting into the industry now?
Well, Jake, the first thing would be everybody's story is different, how they got to the point where they are. How I got started would be different from what somebody else would tell you. So when you ask people that have been in the business how they got there, understand that everybody's path is incredibly different. The other part is, getting into this business is a challenge. Getting that first job and getting the foot in the door is always tough. Be willing to do whatever it takes to do that. Listen to everybody, learn from everybody. But also the other thing I would tell you, it is an incredibly wonderful people business. You meet so many wonderful people. You remember the people that, whether they helped you, whether they were nice to you, whether they just made a great impression, but just by their personality. Embrace the fact that it's a people business. I've been very, very fortunate in all the years that I've been doing this since 1979 to make some wonderful friendships, not only people who were great coworkers and great colleagues, but people who have become great personal friends over the years. So, be open to all of the different people that come across, listen to all of the stories you hear about how things get started. And also too, those relationships oftentimes end up opening doors that you would never think about. The opportunity to get the job doing the Ohio State games came to me because of somebody that I knew and hadn't had contact with for over 20 years. And all of a sudden they reached out to me when the job was going to become open. So just the fact that it's an incredible people business, just embrace everybody you come up, the experience that you have with everybody you come across would be the biggest thing I could say.
I love that advice. And, from a legend himself, Paul Keels, 5-time now Ohio Sportscaster of the Year. Thank you so much for coming on, Paul. I'm sure our listeners are going to love to come back and watch this. Thank you again, and have a great week.
I don't know about the legend part, but thank you, Jake, for having me.
I hope to see you in Winston this summer. Thank you again.
That sounds good. Looking forward to it.